et bonjour aux booms et busts programme. Mon nom est Jonathan Davis. Un grand bienvenue. A great welcome to the show. It is Monday, the 24th of April, and it's just after 1:10 in the afternoon. What are we going to talk about? There's nothing to talk about. Well, there's France, there's the United Kingdom, and of course, we'll talk about economics and markets. We'll have some quotes for you. Goodness me, there's so much to talk about. Isn't it amazing that the left hates the right so much that in France, the left's preferred candidate is an investment banker? I mean, come on! When are the people going to get what is going on? I suspect never. And that, of course, is the problem. You've got Macron, who has just come out number one. He beat Le Pen by a couple of percent. And actually, is an interesting point. The polls were brilliantly accurate, except for Marine Le Pen. They reckon she'd get 1 or 2% more than she actually got. I'm talking about the average of recent weeks' polls, whereas for the other three main candidates, they were within a couple of decimal points spot on. It strongly suggests that Emmanuel Macron is going to be the next president of France. Before we talk about the UK general election, there's so much to talk about. Let's just consider and contrast the two candidates going into the runoff in the presidential election in France. Macron is pro-EU. He's a cronyist. He's apparently left of centre in the mould of Blair and Clinton and Hollande. He's anti-Assad, which makes him therefore pro-ISIS by default. You can't be a bit pregnant. He's anti-Israel. He's for open door immigration. He's pro-green. And he is a banker from the bluest of blue chip investment banks, Rothschild. And it's such a shocker. International global banks were up hugely at the open this morning. And I mean, massive rise in bank price shares. So, there's your man who's going to be the next president of the Republic of France. In other words, nothing changes in France. Against him will be Le Pen, but as I said to you a few weeks ago, long before the first round yesterday, I said she'll get through the first round, but there's no way on earth that the French will vote Marine Le Pen in, the National Front candidate, in to be the executive president of France. She's anti-EU. What more do you need to know? Although she is, without doubt, a socialist, a corporatist. Remind me who Benito Mussolini was, bringing the corporation and state together. Excuse me, isn't that what fascism is? So, yes, they call her a fascist, and she is a fascist. She's very much on the far left. She's a big spender. She's a protectionist. She is anti-immigration. She's pro-Israel. So, to her credit, that one. She's a career politician. Indeed, she's the next level in a dynasty. Remember Jean-Marie Le Pen, her dad, who created the National Front in France. Would I want Marine Le Pen to be president? I don't really give a stuff who is the French president. From the point of view that if Marine Le Pen wins, then you can guarantee that then is the end of the EU. From that point of view, yes, I suppose marginally I'd probably want her to win, but she's not going to win. And it doesn't really matter who wins, because with Macron winning, Germany and France will continue to run the EU. Nothing much will change. Britain's leaving the EU anyway. So, there's 27 countries. They can do what the heck they want to do. I don't care what they do. And you shouldn't either. But what is far more important is that Theresa May announced a snap election last Tuesday to, of course, happen in the second week of June. And this does, in fact, I would say it virtually, or maybe even guarantees, that the UK will leave the single market. And I quite like that, as you can imagine. But and I want to highlight my mate Simon Richards, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Freedom Association, which, although they won't admit it, is actually the provisional wing of the right side of the Tory party. Yes, there are some there's a couple of libertarian socialists there, believe it or not. Although, libertarian socialism, they are total idiots that they believe that socialists could ever be libertarian. I mean, it's just so, these people are mad. There's a fair number of kippers there, but it is essentially a Tory construct on the right wing. But why am I mentioning it? Well, Simon Richards, I think he is simply Simon or something like that on Twitter. He's started this tweet of the day, general election bribe of today. And indeed today, Monday the 24th, he's talking about the Tories capping energy prices. I mean, Thomas Sowell, you said it. Listener, you've heard me talking about it. And Oscar Amaringer, he also said something beautiful. Politics is the gentle art of getting votes from the poor and campaign funds from the rich by promising to protect each from the other. It is a joke. The whole thing is a joke. People ask me, who are you going to vote for, Jonathan? Well, let's look at what the alternatives are. UKIP, Socialist. Green, Socialist. Labour, Socialist. Liberal Democrat, Socialist. Tories, Cronyist and Socialist. What's the point of voting? What is the point? I'll come back to that question in a moment. I well remember I was driving along with my family on Tuesday the 18th at 10:45. There was an interjection into the BBC programme that we were listening to on the radio, and they said, please be aware that the Prime Minister will be making a formal announcement about something at 11 a.m. So I quipped to my wife, she's going to call an election, isn't she? She is, isn't she? Well, we had a laugh. 15 minutes later, we weren't laughing. Well, actually, that's not true. My first reaction was to give a hearty laugh at the cynicism of what Theresa May is doing. And then, frankly, I listened to her argument. And she said, look, the Tories don't have, I mean, this wasn't her words, the Tories don't have a majority in the House of Lords. And the House of Lords is going to gang up against the Brexiters. I thought, yeah, that's a fair point. She also said that groups are ganging together. I mean, essentially, she was talking about Blair and the Liberal Democrats and other socialists, the SNP. They were going to gang up in the House of Commons, and they were going to try and create some way to stop Brexit. And she said, look, this is the reason why I'm going for an election. Now, we know, of course, the polls were so positive to the Tories. I mean, it takes me back to Merton, Mrs. Merton, and Debbie Reynolds. Tell us, said Mrs. Merton to Debbie Reynolds, and Paul Daniels was sitting there. Tell us, Debbie Reynolds, what was it that first attracted you to multimillionaire Paul Daniels? And I have to tell you, I mean, that's a famous quip now, but I actually watched it the first time it went out. I was rolling about when I first heard that. It was sensational television. The late, was it Caroline Aherne, the late, great Caroline Aherne, may she rest in peace. So tell me, Mrs. May, what is it about the current polls that put you 20% ahead of Labour that's brought you to bring about a general election? May's going to get a majority of anywhere between 80 and 150. I mean, let's face it, it's going to happen. And her arguments for holding the election, they work for me. They do. She's only got, a dozen majority right now? Yes, there is a risk, therefore, that we wouldn't get Brexit. And, that is my prime focus right now. Excuse me. This guarantees pretty well that we will Brexit. I suspect she's now going to stick with her 12-point plan. However, it hasn't happened. First of all, the general election hasn't happened. Second of all, Brexit hasn't happened. We won't see that until sort of March 2019. Well, let's go for it. But I want to go back to the question of why would you vote? And there's a chart attached to the tweet announcing this show. This statist flowchart. It starts off with, I want government to make things better, so I go down to vote. Did it work? No. So vote. Did it work? No. So vote. Did it work? No. So vote. In other words, you get the point. Government never makes things better. But they're really good at getting you voting. Well, I'm going to spoil my ballot. I'm going to put a dirty, big, massive cross across the whole ballot paper, spoil the ballot. I'm going to send my little message. There's no one for me to vote. Absolutely no one. I'm going to just make a comment about that in a second, which may slightly surprise you. If you don't vote, then that's just apathy. You couldn't be bothered to get off your sofa watching Jeremy Kyle, eating pizza and chips, battered, of course, in deep fried oil. If you spoil your ballot, and if enough of us spoil our ballot, and let's go for the British record of number of ballots spoiled. Let's spread the message. Let's send them the message that we can't stand any of you. Well, that's where I stand on that. I was a bit teed off, actually, I have to say, about the election being called. Because following that, in Clacton-on-Sea, you then had Aaron Banks saying, I'm going to stand against Carswell. And then what did Carswell do? He resigned. So that teed me off a little, because I was actually going to say to you, Carswell's going to lose the next election. Because instead of it being a two-way UKIP against the Tories, it was, of course, going to be independent against the strong Tories, against the strong, well-financed UKIP. But now that Carswell's gone, well, that's a shame. Can't do anything on that. But I'll tell you what, though. First and foremost, as far as I can tell, Carswell's a free marketer. And, you know, I actually met him before he stood, first of all, for UKIP in, what would that be, October 2015. Is that right? Yeah, October 2015. He defected, or he left the Tories. He stood for election, and, or was it 2014? No, it was 2015. And of course, he then won the 2015 by-election with a landslide. But before that by-election, I actually asked him, what are the free market policies that UKIP has that makes you join UKIP? And his answer was absolutely spot on. I didn't join UKIP for free market policies. He joined UKIP to help in the battle to get Britain out of the EU. And whether or not he had a hand in achieving it, the fact is, we won the Brexit referendum. And he's right. UKIP is not a free market party. We're going to talk about, a little bit about the parties, or a couple of them, in a moment. And that's just a little snippet, something that I did a couple of years ago, which I was going to tell you about Carswell. Was he's a free marketer. If he were to set up, I don't know, the Capitalists Party, I'd probably join it and set up the East or Mid Hearts constituency party, or whatever the local constituency is called. And I'd probably try and stand for Parliament with that party. But it looks as if he's leaving politics altogether. Fair enough. Okay. On the subject of the parties, I've got some notes here about what the Tories are pushing. They're pushing sound financial management. They're pushing defence, which means bombing Assad when he didn't do anything that they say he did. They're pushing lower taxes. They're pushing a falling deficit. So let's look at those. Sound financial management and reducing the deficit. Are you aware that since 2010, when the Tories took over, whether it's coalition or the Tories, what the heck, they've actually borrowed more than Gordon Brown? Did you know that? So this nonsense of sound financial management, it's total BS. And this thing about reducing the deficit, all you hear about is they half the deficit. What they're talking about is in the year 2010 of Gordon Brown's last fiscal year as Chancellor, that was the year he borrowed massively to bail out the banks. in the next 7 years, the Tories have borrowed massively, and they compare it with that one final year of Gordon Brown's management of the economy and prime ministership. It's total arrant nonsense. George Communist Osborne said that he's going to slash the deficit to zero by the end of the last parliament. What a bald-faced lie. Said time and time again, reducing the deficit. Bald-faced lie, time and time again. Lowering the taxes. Yeah. Have you looked at how much taxes we're paying? And by the way, it's semantics. Do you know what the biggest tax of all is? Income tax? No. Inflation is the biggest tax of all. Think about it for 10 seconds. So they're not lowering taxes at all. It was the Tories that brought in Help to Buy. Now, I will remember in 2012, house prices were flat for the year. The market was going down. The prices were about to fall off a cliff. And then in the spring 2013 budget, Communist Osborne brings in Help to Buy, which I call Help to Sell. And what did that do? It got more money lending into the housing market. So of course, that's what got the housing market going again. It's all about easy lending. So, they have Help to Buy. It's 40% even Help to Buy loans from the government in London. This is communism, folks, when the government directly lends on property. Have they prosecuted any bank generals? Have they heck? And as I say, they're borrowing more than Gordon Brown. So, this is the reason why I have zero intention of voting for the Tories. Some of the listeners, I know you're into the Kippers. Well, they've just been talking about, Paul Nuttall's just been talking about, he's going to ban the burqa. That's their manifesto. They're going to ban Sharia law. They're going to say, if you have information on female genital mutilation, you'll be bound to inform the police. And they're going to ban postal voting. It seems to me there's a lot of Islamic stuff there. Of course, I get the thing about FGM. Oh, by the way, I saw a tweet last week that over the last year, there were 121 cases of clitoris cutting in Wales last year. Are the people seriously telling me that out of 121, there hasn't been a single prosecution? This is GBH if it's done to a child under the age of 16. Obviously, it's grievous bodily harm for which they should be put away in jail for 5 to 10 years. So, you can't just bring in this thing, you're bound to inform the police. Police, go and investigate it. And if no one fesses up, then take the parents down. Because it's the parents who have either made it or let it happen. Take the parents down. There is no way on earth you can take a baby away from the parents, cut the clitoris off, and then say the parents didn't know anything about it. So UKIP, you don't know what you're talking about. Banning Sharia law, that doesn't change anything. And it's also illiberal. It's illibertarian. Ban the burqa. It's illibertarian. You cannot tell people what to dress in. And Sharia law, it is a dreadful thing, no doubt. But that is not the solution. The solution is give the Sharia hate spreaders as much media exposure as possible. Let the people hear their crap. That is the solution. Not banning them from speaking, but letting them speak as much as possible with as wide an exposure as possible. Yeah. And the other funny thing is, the national leader of an apparently national party won't say which, if any, constituency he's going to run in the June 2017 general election. That is the craziest thing I can imagine. I'll leave it there. It's just too funny. Right. Oh yeah, look at this next chart. People just love the state. Where's that chart? It shows, it's probably in the previous page, yeah. It shows that more people than ever, since this survey was first started 22 years ago, more people than ever believe that the government should do more to solve our problems and help meet people's needs. Of course, the people don't know what they're talking about. Government does not solve problems. Government creates problems. And just remember this quote from Tony Petito. The problem with political jokes is they often get elected to office. What have we got in economics? I think we've done enough politics now. The latest Confederation British Industry Industrial Survey for April, it shows, just announced today, the strongest growth in export orders in 6 years. Indeed, non-EU exports are now rising at the fastest pace on record. Absolutely fantastic news. We need to export more. We need to manufacture more, because that generates true wealth and long-term jobs. Building a house, building a road, it doesn't generate wealth or long-term jobs. Selling insurance, selling banking, it generates wealth for a small minority, but not for the general economy. UK retail sales are higher than a year ago, March 2017 compared to March 16. They're up 1.7%. However, you should note that store prices are up 3.3% versus a year ago. Inflation generally is about 2.5%, which means that store prices are rising even faster than general inflation. I think Amazon's going to do better out of that than anyone else. FX Follower kindly sent me something from the Washington Post. It says that in the USA, they're taking out the most cash from their houses by remortgaging since the peak back in 2008, prior to the crash. Well, you know, when you do that, it's suggestive of a housing and economic market top. But we'll see. And in UK housing, there's a chap by the name of Daniel Farey-Jones, who's written a piece, and his headline is "London Letting Agents Search for Tenants." There's a chart there, expectations for rent growth or falls by letting agents over the next 3 months in London. And it shows that London letting agents are massively bearish. And they turned bearish about a year ago, and they've just got progressively more and more bearish. I seem to recall heavily when Osborne brought out Section 24 and ramping up of taxes for buy-to-letters, their sole response, the buy-to-letters response was, the landlords was, oh, we're going to be forced to raise rents. It's not our fault. Oh, no. And we care about the tenants. We don't want to chuck them out. So, you know, we're going to have, oh, I'm really sorry. Oh, hands in the air. I'm going to have to raise rents. Yeah. Well, you can't raise rents because you don't have the demand. Tough. Welcome to the real world where for once you're not getting bailed out every 5 minutes. Now, I'm not saying you won't yet get bailed out, but you're not getting bailed out at the moment. So I think there's going to be problems in the housing market. I'm not complaining, I can assure you. And by the way, how's that going to spill over to the economy? With the vote in France yesterday, the global markets opened last night at 9-10 o'clock p.m. British summertime with wild swings. The euro against the dollar went up 1.5%. Gold's down $30, $40, to give you a couple of examples. But you know, some of you will be looking at the likes of CNBC, Zero Hedge. They'll be looking at Twitter. You'll be seeing people, you'll be hearing the BBC and Sky News saying Macron has stabilised, Macron has destabilised. They're not there to educate you, and they're certainly not there to make you money. They're there to sell audience, sell newspapers, sell adverts, get bums on seats. They are not there to educate you. One point to note, opening prices, when the markets open, or even in the futures before they open, they don't matter much. What matters far more is how do they close. So, you know, I said earlier that international banks based in the EU and the UK, they were up massively, and it's true, they were. But what's going to be far more important is how do they close at say 4 o'clock in London. Even more important is how do the banks close at 9 o'clock BST in New York. Because what happens in New York, in Wall Street, in markets, is far more important than anywhere else. And even more important than that is how they close, how all these prices close, whether it's currencies or stocks or government bonds or whatever, is how they close at the closes on Friday. The daily close is far more important than the open. The weekly close is far more important than the day. And by the way, next week will be the end of the month. And the monthly close is even more important than the weekly, because the daily tells us the short-term trend, the weekly tells us the intermediate trend, like months, maybe a year or so, year and a half possibly, and the monthly tells us the long-term trend. And it's the trends that I certainly follow, not the intraday, intra-week, intra-month gyrations. I could care less. They're of intellectual interest, but they don't make me do anything. Particularly interesting in the markets is what happened to the dollar and what appears to be happening right now. The dollar fell sharply, as I say, against most currencies, although it rose against the yen. Why is that important? I'll talk about that one first of all. There is a very strong correlation between a rising yen and a rising gold. A falling yen and a falling gold. And sure enough, yen fell, gold fell. But let's see what happens during the day. The dollar index, that's the dollar against a basket of currencies, has been falling gradually since December, early January, from an index level of about 101 and some change, and as of now, it's about 99. Now, you might not think 2% move is a big move. It is a big move in the trend, but 99, or more specifically, strange as it may seem, but it's true, 98.5 is a huge level of support for the dollar. I've got a chart there, and if the dollar breaks below 98.5, then it's exactly what I've been saying for weeks. The dollar's going down to 90 or lower, and commodities, gold, wheat, oil, you name it, they're going through the roof. However, because 98.5, 99 is such huge support, I don't actually expect it to break it imminently. It is probably more likely to do so over the next 2 or 3 weeks. It seems more likely that the wild gyrations overnight are just markets doing their crazy things. Instead, what's likely is the dollar's gone down to 99. It might even go down to 98.5, but it's going to bounce. And I think it's going to go above 100, maybe even back up to 101. I doubt it, but it's possible, but above 100. And that is negative for commodities. We're seeing the stock market liking the Macron, basically anointing almost. Certainly he went with the polls. And the market sees him now as the next president of France. Government bonds don't like it. Interest rates are going up. Gold has gone down. And I think this could play out over the next week or two. But as I say, next week is the new month. And I think we could see normal service resuming. The dollar going down. Gold going up. But there's one thing we should note. Oil looks as if it could be going into the low 40s. So bear that in mind depending upon your investments are structured. But at the low 40s, we're currently in the high 40s. We could go up to 50, 51, 52, I don't know. But it looks as if the trend is down for now. And it could be going down to the low 40s, bearing in mind, just a year ago, it was in the high 20s. So actually, the trend is still up. even if it goes down to the low 40s. Now, I did say several shows ago, it would have to go below the mid 40s for there to be something serious. Well, do you know what? It went down to 47. It went back up into the low 50s. Since then, it's coming back down again. So it doesn't like it going up a lot just now. So the short-term trend is down. But the bigger picture, the medium trend, is still up. People ask me what's going to happen to the pound now with the general election. I've had a number of people, funnily enough, come up to me who know me and ask me. And I say, and it sounds a bit like Confucius, very inscrutable and wise, but they look at me as if I'm mad. I say, the trend in the pound is up. And they expect me to elaborate. They say, well, yeah, I know, but I want to buy my euros for my holiday. What should I do? And I repeat it. The trend in the pound is up. I'm not a blooming prophet, mateys. What I do is I follow what the market is doing. I do then say, look, the election's got nothing to do with it. Like Brexit's got nothing to do with it. Because at that time, the trend in the pound was down. And then a bit later, the trend in the pound started going up. So the trend in the pound is up until it is no longer. And, people who expect you to be able to tell the future and say the pound is going to target this amount and so on, that's not how it works. And anyone who tells you specific targets, take it with a large pinch of salt. Well, yes, charts do indicate where something may go. That is certainly true as well. But I find most people who have lots of targets generally don't use charts. But okay. But what I find very interesting, and one of the charts that I'm showing there is it's the CME British Pound Net Speculative Exposure. In other words, this is the futures and options market, showing that speculators are hugely short the British pound. But then the next chart shows the pound bottomed as long ago as October last year. That's 6 months now. And it's just taken out the 200-day moving average. This is the pound against the dollar. So while the market is hugely shorting the pound, and I mean hugely, unsurprisingly, the pound is doing the opposite. As I'm always telling my clients, it's amazing. The market often does the opposite of sentiment and positioning. If the market is positioned hugely positive, it's amazing how the price actually often falls. And if the market is hugely bearish and negative and short, it's amazing how the price often rises. And that's certainly the case here. Let's briefly look at stocks now. And I can tell you that a survey from the Bank of America of their investors, 83% of respondents think that US stocks are overvalued. And this is the highest percentage of bullish sentiment since before the crash in 2008. And what have I been saying about the stock market over the last few weeks? I'm expecting it to fall 10 or 15% from the February high. Now let's move on to the US stock market in relation to emerging markets. Now the next chart I'm showing you is a 20-year chart of the S&P versus the emerging market stocks index. Brazil, Russia, India, China, Mexico, Indonesia, etc. And you will see that from the dot-com bursting in 99-2000, for the next, 11 or so years, the US market kept falling versus emerging markets. From 2011 until the beginning of last year, the S&P rose strongly, outperformed emerging markets. But note, from the beginning of last year, they have been going in tandem. Now, you see the rising red line. That is the rising support line. And if the ratio of the S&P to emerging markets falls, then that means that emerging markets are now outperforming again the S&P. And I tell you what, if that trend line is taken out to the downside, this could strongly suggest emerging markets are going to outperform US markets for years, just like it did in the first decade of this century. And I'll do another chart. I haven't researched it yet, but I'll bet it's not dissimilar for the S&P or US markets against international developed markets, as in the EU, UK, Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, Japan. I'll bet it's a similar situation. It seems to me that US markets could be approaching a multi-year, maybe even a multi-decade high against other countries' stocks, against the rest of the world. And this is very important in terms of your asset allocating in your pensions. Moving on to government bonds. The first chart shows the US 10-year Treasury yield over the last year and a half or so. And it takes us in the red line, it shows us the last 10 years falling trend of 10-year US government borrowing rates. And last year, rates went uber low. Basically, last year we went into deflation. Interest rates fell sharply, government bond prices rose sharply. In the second half of last year, till the end of the year, interest rates rose sharply, government bond prices fell sharply. But look where we have been for the last few months. We've been walking along the 10-year trend line. And actually, as of a few days ago, the interest rates fell below the 10-year trend line. As of today, as I speak, they're back up to the trend line. So that's the intermediate term picture. The next picture is government bond yields back to 2012, 5 years. It shows 30-year bond yields, which are somewhat similar to 10 years. So, you can basically expand the first chart we just looked at, which is 2 years, 1.5 years, to this 5-year chart. And it shows similarly that 30-year rates have been flat for months and they're breaking down. But look also at the next chart. TIPS is the instrument that you buy into when you buy inflation-linked government bonds. If you believe inflation's going to rise, you'll buy TIPS. If you believe inflation's going to fall, you'll buy government bonds. And the tip to government bond ratio is also breaking down. After a rise which took us up to major resistance. And note, the inflation linking bond to the deflation linked bond trend is down over the last few years. This is a double top, and double tops are very, very powerful. And unless it's a fake move down, if that ratio goes up, then sure, we're going into multi-month, maybe multi-year inflation. But if that trend keeps on falling, this is the first indication that we could see even lower bond yields than we saw in the summer of last year. And that, therefore, would mean we're in line for a 20, 40, 60% rally in government bond prices. Well, we'll see how that goes. They tell me, apparently, that when the government or when the central bank raises interest rates, that of course raises government borrowing rates. Well, the next chart shows you very clearly that when the Fed hiked the rate in December 16 and March 17, in other words, over the last few months, actually, government borrowing rates fell immediately. So, it's very interesting because why does that happen? Well, clearly, when you get so much debt in the system and the idiots in the ivory towers bought and paid for by Wall Street, when they raise the interest rate, this has a devastating effect on the economy. So, of course, it's deflationary. So, the next time you hear someone say, the central bank's raised interest rates, this is inflationary, laugh at them, slap them around the face, because they are selling you something. They are not educating you. I'm coming to the end of the show. I should tell you that commodities have been taking a breather recently. I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, I did say gold needs to get above $1,300 an ounce, and it's not likely to do immediately, but give it some time and it will do. And sure enough, it's pulled back $30, $40. That's unsurprising. Don't worry about it. However, look at the next chart. If anyone ever asks you, what's this fascination you've got with gold? Why do you invest in gold? Just tell them to pick a currency and look at the last 15 years of gold price changes in that currency. Green means up, red means down. That's all you need to tell them. Do you know how much it costs to visit the grave of Adam Smith, the father of free market economics, the guy who invented the invisible hand concept? Nothing. Do you know how much it costs to visit Karl Marx's grave? This famous communist, spread the wealth. £12. The quote of the week comes from David Horowitz. In practice, socialism didn't work. But socialism could never have worked because it is based on false premises about human psychology and society and gross ignorance of the human economy. David Horowitz. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the number of downloads on each weekly show to now over 500. I am truly delighted that more and more people are getting to hear what is really going on. Tweet me at Booms Busts Show. If you're not following me there, why not? If you like the show, I tell you, you'll love the Twitter account. And retweet the Twitter account. Tell other people, and then they can listen to the weekly show. And because it's a podcast, they can download it from their mobile into listening in their car, going to and from work, on their mobile device, with their headphones, on the train. You can listen to it while you're eating your lunch. Email me at jd@theboomsandbustsshow.com. Thank you for listening. I've had a blast. This is Jonathan Davis saying au revoir et à bientôt, à la semaine prochaine.